All right, what's up, guys? I am back with another podcast episode, and this week I actually can't say we because Will was a little bit too busy to make it, and I am very committed to getting a podcast out every single week of this year. So even if Will is not here, I am going to make sure a podcast goes out. I will say it's probably going to be a little bit weird doing a solo podcast and essentially just talking to myself for 30 minutes, so bear with me. This might be a little bit of a different episode, but we're committed to making it happen. So anyways, I just wanted to read one of the reviews we got from on Apple Podcasts recently because we always enjoy seeing these. And this one was actually pretty funny to me. Willie said, "You mentioned that you would read a joke from a comment. So here is one about Zane. A normal human man inhales helium and gets a squeaky voice. Zane inhales helium and nothing happens." This podcast is great. I love that you guys are also in on this banter with Zane. Like, we love to banter with Zane and Thomas. We're great friends with those guys over there. So if you guys ever hear us bantering, it's all in good fun. We're not trying to actually be mean to each other. But I love when you guys hop in on this because I think it's so much more funny. So thanks for the review. We really appreciate it. But moving on, we have just one news update that I specifically wanted to talk about because we don't talk about it enough, apparently, and that's delamination. All right, jokes aside, you guys are probably sick and tired of hearing about this. To be honest, I'm tired about talking about it, but I do think it's an important topic that everyone is very curious about, and we'll talk about a little bit more about the drama that happened at the Red Rock PPA tournament this weekend involving delamination. But my update for you is that I have a guy, a buddy of mine, testing two paddles for me. One I won't name yet because it's not out, and then the other one is a Vatic Flash 16 millimeter. Both of these are thermoforms. Both of them are allegedly using the new glue. And for reference, in the past, he was able to delaminate his first Legacy in probably less than 2 weeks. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if it was about in a week. And then after that, he delaminated one of my Vatics in about 7 days. And then I gave him another one, and he delaminated that one in 3 days. He hits very hard. He plays a lot. He's the perfect person to test the durability of paddles. I cannot express to you how hard this guy hits, okay? I've given him both of those paddles, and he's had them for probably about 2 weeks now, and he still hasn't managed to delaminate either of them. Now, I don't want to say that this means the issue is gone, but based on how fast he broke 3 other paddles in the past with the old glue, I am optimistic that the issue has at least gotten a lot better if he hasn't managed to delaminate them yet. So that's looking pretty good. I'm happy to see that. I also haven't managed to delaminate a new glue paddle yet. Not going to say it's solved, but it's certainly looking good, so that is great to see. The other thing I want to talk about is this morning, I did get to hit a brand new Legacy. I don't have a personal one yet, but it was really nice. I will say it did feel easier for me to use overall. Now, granted, I only got to drill a little bit. I hit some drops, I hit some dinks, did some hands, and then played a singles game with it. And it felt much easier to use than my previous Legacy. And I'm starting to wonder if my old Legacy delaminated early on in my review process, and I just didn't know yet. Because no one knew what delamination... Well, that's not true. People knew what delamination was, but delamination basically meant something different or had a different impact on performance in the past. So I think what happened is it delaminated early on me, and I didn't realize it. Because when I first got the paddle, I thought, okay, yeah, I could get used to this. The power's not that bad. Think I could get this under control. And I never could get it down. And it felt like it was getting harder and harder and harder to use. And I just kind of thought I was losing my mind because I've never experienced this with a paddle. Normally, the more time I spend with it, the easier it gets. And then it wasn't until the Minnesota PPA, which was probably late February or so probably about a month after my review, and my friend who has delaminated all these paddles, he was like, "Hey, is your Legacy busted?" And I was like, "Oh, no, mine's fine." And we both pressed into the face, and I could hear the cracking. And I was like, "Oh, well, that's clearly not good. That's probably delaminated." So from what I have seen, the Legacy doesn't make as obvious of a noise when it's delaminated. I mean, if I compare the brand new one to the current delaminated one sitting next to me, I can tell. But with the 6.0, the thing sounded like a rocket. It was extremely obvious when it delaminated, a little less obvious with the Legacy. But all of that to say, the new one felt much easier to use, maybe not as powerful, but it was what I think the paddle should be. What I felt like I was hitting before was just too much. And this, I was like, oh, paddle feels great. You still have awesome power. It's not like you don't have any power or anything. It was just now I could actually control it. So when I finally get one of my own, I will keep you guys updated. Personally, if it did tone the power down just a little bit, I think this is where it should be. I think more people would benefit from it and be able to use the paddle. So we'll keep an eye on that and let you guys know, but those are my updates on thermoforming. Next up, I want to talk about the paddle drama at Red Rock. Oh my goodness. There is just so much drama amongst the pros right now with the delamination, and understandably so. You know, these people are competing for their livelihood. They don't want to be cheated out of money, which is very understandable. So this weekend, we'll just kind of recap, as far as I know, the paddles that were challenged or kind of called out. So the first one that I'm aware of was Elise Jones in singles challenged Salome's paddle. I don't have a lot of info on that one other than that it got challenged. I assume that Elise thought it was delaminated. And I believe Salome was using a Vatic Pro Flash 16mm. And then after that, the next one you're probably all familiar with was Leah Jansen, also challenged Salome's paddle. There was a lot of drama over that match. And from what I understand, there was no testing on site to test for deflection. So all of these paddles that got challenged are going to be sent off to the lab and then checked for delamination. And one thing about that I think is interesting is that if you lost to one of these paddles, let's say we'll use Leah Jansen as an example. If you lost to that paddles in the semifinals and then you find out later that the paddle was delaminated after testing, well, what good does it do you? Okay, you take away that person's prize money that moved on, but the person who lost, you can't rectify them losing. So I just think they need a better system for that, whether it's on-site testing or pre-testing before all the matches. I don't really know what it is, but it doesn't feel very fair. You're obviously punishing the person who used an illegal paddle, but the person who got cheated out of it, it doesn't really do them any good. So I'm curious to see how that gets handled in the future. But regardless, there was a lot of drama in the Salome and Leah Jansen match. Paddle got challenged afterwards. Salome went on to the final. And then there was also Travis Redenmeyer and Tyson McGuffin. Now, that was an interesting one because I have hit a 002 quite a bit. I also had a friend who had one that delaminated, or at least I believe it delaminated because it made a very weird sound and the ball was very dead off that paddle. You wouldn't want to use it. It was the regular type of delamination where the paddle just kind of sucked. Now with Travis, he did say in the middle of his match, he kind of called out to Tyson, hey, that 002 doesn't sound right. And he just thought something was up with the paddle. And if I recall correctly, I think I watched a bit of that match and Tyson did swap halfway through. I don't know if he swapped because he thought it was delaminated or if he just didn't like how the paddle was feeling, because he did do that again in the final later on. So I don't really know. But regardless, Travis had an Instagram video where he kind of talked about this and just said, I know what a 002 feels like. And it wasn't that. Now, to be fair, I believe Tyson is playing with a 002A, which is what James Ignatowicz had been using, and he's now using a 002. I have one of the 002As. It doesn't hit harder, I can tell you that. I haven't hit it extensively, but when I was with James, I got to mess with it. Mostly felt like a 002, just toned down a little bit. I've been given some information on the 002A. I don't really know how much of that I'm at liberty to share or not share. And to be honest, I don't even think it's that relevant for most of the public. I don't know if the paddle's ever going to see the light of day. All I know is that paddle does not hit any harder. And as far as I understand, the internals of it are not very different from a 002. Now, one thing that a lot of you might not know, and more information is coming about this recently, is that the 002 is apparently technically thermoformed. So I think Selkirk released an article or a post somewhere talking about they hadn't announced that the 002 had edge foam and was thermoformed because they didn't want the competition to realize and then catch up on the technology right away. I will probably take my 002 and cut it apart and check on it and see if it's thermoformed the same way. Maybe it's not the same way, because I think we can all agree it sure doesn't feel how these other thermoformed paddles are. Now, to be fair, these other ones are raw carbon fiber. The 002 isn't. There's probably a lot of different things that go into making the paddle feel how it feels. So there's a lot of information that's kind of missing on the 002. If it's thermoformed, why, when it delaminates, does it not perform how these new ones are delaminating? Are they not built the same way? Is there different ways to use the word thermoforming? It's really hard to say, guys. A lot of these manufacturers obviously want to keep things close to their chest, understandably so. You don't want the competition to steal your secrets, but it makes it hard to diagnose a lot of what's going on the Pro Tour right now. All I can tell you right now is that the 002, when it's delaminated in the past, and I've seen it, it wasn't better. So I don't know what was going on with Tyson's paddle. All I know is that Travis thought something was going on with his. I don't know if he actually challenged it at the end or not. All I know is that he made a video talking about that he didn't think the paddle seemed right. Then after that, we also had Krista Gechiva, who uses a Carbon 1X, and hers was challenged by Lucy Kovalova, I believe, and her paddle is going to be sent off to the lab. I didn't hear too much about that one. I just know that it got challenged. So this was a really interesting tournament because we had several paddles get challenged, and to be honest, as far as I'm aware, that might be the same amount of paddles that have ever been challenged on the PPA Pro Tour in one tournament. So the pros are definitely getting a little more worried, paranoid, or whatever word or alert about the paddles, and clearly they're more willing to challenge them. I am curious to see what happens. All I know at this point is I think any pro knows when a paddle's delaminated. So at this point, if there are pros out there choosing to use a delaminated paddle, I don't think you can play the gullible card or the innocent card, basically, because it's just, I don't know, it's really obvious when the paddle's delaminated. I don't know how you wouldn't know. So I don't know. We'll kind of see what happens, but that was some of the drama over the weekend. Be curious to see how the next pro tournament shapes out. The next thing I want to talk about is just the tournament as a whole. So if you don't want spoilers, I would not listen to this section of the podcast because I will be talking about all the finals right now. So first, I just want to talk about Zane and Susanna Barr in mixed. They played awesome. I got to catch a couple of their matches. They managed to defeat Tyson and Catherine, Travis and Leia. And in the bronze match, they also defeated Riley Newman and Andrea Koop. They ended up losing to James Ignatowicz and Anna Bright in the semifinals, but they went to 3. And it was honestly a really fun game to watch. I mean, I haven't seen Susanna Barr in a PPA tournament in a minute or seen her with a lot of big results. Same with Zane, to be honest. So it's really fun to see them make a run and just see a shakeup on the tour. If you didn't watch much of this tournament, Ben and Anna Lee weren't at this tournament. And to be honest, these tournaments are so much more entertaining when Ben and Anna Lee aren't there because they're so good. They just win everything. And, it's a huge testament to how good they are at the game. And I'm not saying I wouldn't want to see them in the game. Obviously, I think them being in the sport is great. But when you see them win every single tournament and then they both don't go, you just get to see some really fun shakeups on the tour. And I love it. And the finals were a great example of this. For the men's final, we had Tyson McGuffin and Brendan Long versus Colin Johns and Dekel Barr. And it was extremely amazing, entertaining pickleball. Seriously, go watch that match if you haven't checked it out. It went to 5 games. It was absolutely unbelievable. The whole time you're rooting for Tyson and Brendan, or at least I was. Seeing Brendan make a final was amazing. And if you didn't see the stick figure graphic that he made for himself, because the PPA didn't have one for him, it was amazing. They showed it on the screens at the event. I think Memes of Pickleball might have even shared it, so you can check it out on their page. But amazing games, high-level pickleball, super fun to watch. You could tell both teams wanted it. It was awesome to see Brendan, as someone who's never won a PPA title, let alone even probably made it to a semis as far as I'm aware. He obviously did pretty well at Major League Pickleball, but prior to that, I hadn't even heard of the guy really. So huge congrats to them. Tyson hasn't won a PPA doubles title since I think 2021, they said. I'm not positive if that's correct. So just awesome. You could tell they were really happy about it. It was awesome to see. And then same thing with the women's match. Etta Wright and Megan Dazan versus Leia Jansen and Elise Jones. Went to 5 games. Absolutely amazing. Was super fun to watch. I don't know. It's just amazing pickleball when you don't see Ben and Anna Lee there. Now, one thing that I did think was pretty interesting about that match is towards the end, I think it was 9-8-1 or right around that area, they took a timeout, and when they came back, I believe Etta Wright was supposed to be serving, but Megan served the ball, and neither the team nor the ref caught it, and then on the next point, they corrected them. It was very weird to see that happen because it felt like the ref, the audience, and the players both missed it. And it is, these days, the PPA doesn't fault you for it. They just tell you where you're supposed to be. But we haven't seen an instance where it gets just completely missed. They win the point and then you go on. I don't know what the protocol for that is. Maybe it is just supposed to be that if no one caught it, it just moves on. But I thought that was kind of interesting, especially with how tight it was in that last game. You know, I don't know that it really mattered who was serving the ball, but when it's that tight, you hate to see something like that get missed. But yeah, also go check out that match if you didn't, because just such good pickleball. To be honest, the singles matches weren't super entertaining. Catherine won the women's singles pretty handedly. In the men's, you had Tyson and Pablo. Pablo was actually up like 7-0 in the first game, and I think he lost both games straight. Like Tyson came back, won the second game, I believe. It was, I had to be rough for Pablo to lose that. Being up 7-0 is just such a big league, but you can never count Tyson out, I suppose. So yeah, it was just a very entertaining tournament overall. You had the drama, you had, new teams making it to the finals. You had a lot of new partnerships. James Ignatowicz and Anna Bright, not a new partnership, but they did end up getting a gold mixed, which was great. They played Jesse and AJ. They won 3 straight. It was kind of unfortunate to see Jesse and AJ not be able to put up a better fight, but I am really happy for James and Anna. I think they played great, and I'm just happy to see their partnership working out. So yeah, that's my updates on the Red Rock Open. Next up, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how I review paddles, just to be more transparent with everyone and give people a better understanding of essentially how I do my job, because I assume people know some of these things, or if you're a little closer to me, you're in the Discord server, or maybe you've talked to me on Instagram, you might know some of these things, but I think there are a lot of people who don't. So we're just going to talk about that a little bit. So the first thing you should know about me is that I'm a perfectionist, and sometimes, and maybe even often, to my own detriment. When I'm reviewing a paddle, I want to have the most thorough information as possible. I want to make sure I don't say anything wrong. I want to make sure I'm using the proper words. I want to make sure I know this paddle inside and out before I speak about it, because there's a lot of different things going into this, right? If I negatively review a paddle, it may affect the company. And if they aren't doing anything wrong, like I don't want to hurt them in a way that they shouldn't be hurt. You don't want to just be a jerk about a paddle because, I don't like it, so I'm just going to be mean about it. That's never my intention. And then you also don't want to give too much praise when maybe a paddle doesn't deserve it, because you as the audience, I don't want to mislead you into buying a paddle that maybe doesn't live up to the hype. So when I'm reviewing a paddle, I think about these things a lot. And there's actually been a number of reviews that I have rewritten. I basically had it written out, and then I changed quite a bit of it, or even the entire script. The most recent one that I can think of for that was Zane's paddle, actually. The initial review was going to be much more harsh. I pretty much had absolutely nothing good to say about it. I hated the paddle. I used it for quite a while and was just not loving it. And then I took it out one more time. So I had recorded the A-roll audio, the main talking head portion of the video. And then the next morning I was like, you know what? If it's going to be this negative of a review, I should just take it out and hit it one more time. So I brought it to a drill session, and I was like, holy cow, the paddle plays better than basically how I said it in my review. So I canceled all the other work I had that day. I scheduled one more court time in the afternoon for some doubles and played with it to figure out what is going on. Was it just fine in drilling and maybe it won't be in a game? And what I figured out was, I talked about this a little bit in the reviews, I had been playing with Duras the whole time, which is usually what we use. But when I drilled, I was using Franklin's. And that gave me a noticeably different impression of the paddle when I used a Franklin. So after that double session, I kind of realized it, but I didn't feel it was fair to just roast this paddle essentially when I had this new information. So I rewrote quite a bit of my script and then re-recorded that video. And the video was also basically edited at that point. So I had to cut out quite a bit of the video and plop in the new portions. So I just say that to help people understand that my goal is never to just be mean to a paddle. I really do think a lot about these things and the people it impacts, you buying it, the companies, all of that. And it's not convenient. I really did not want to have to re-record that. I didn't want to have to schedule that double session that day. But I just think when I guess I'm in the position that I am for reviewing paddles, it's important to be that thorough. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that because that's sometimes why a paddle review takes so long to get out. For example, I've had the Vadix, the Legacy, the 6.0, the Carbon, all since January. We're now in April, and I still don't have reviews out of all of them. I've done Carbon, I've done Legacy, I've done kind of 6.0, I've done the 16 millimeter, there's still the 14 millimeter, and then the Black Diamond, and then I've got the Vadix, the V7, the Flash 16, and the 14. And I would have loved to have these done a long time ago because a lot of you have been asking me for it. When are they coming out? But I just want to be super thorough, and especially with the delamination, I really took even longer because I didn't want to mislead people into buying something that was breaking a lot. So I've tried to give as many disclaimers as I can about it. But believe me, guys, I would love to have it out as soon as possible, but I, again, just don't want to mislead people. It's very important to me. So anyways, that's the perfectionist in me. So now you know that about me. The second thing I want to talk about is usually I play test a paddle for around 2 weeks. This does vary a little bit depending on the paddle. Some paddles definitely don't need 2 weeks of testing because they're so similar to something else that it's like, okay, after a couple sessions, I've got this paddle pretty much figured out. Maybe we'll play it a little bit longer just to be extra sure, but definitely not every single paddle needs 2 weeks. These thermoformed ones I've given much longer than 2 weeks. Trying to think of one that wouldn't really need it. I guess the Ronbus and the Volaire. When I did that, it was actually going to be a first look, but by the time I finished it, I probably did, 7 different play sessions with those paddles, and I just felt I had it figured out. I didn't think I needed the extra week of time with it because I just didn't know what could possibly change. They were similar to other raw carbon fiber paddles. The big deal was that they were just kind of cheaper, or that one was Julian Arnold's. So not every paddle needs 2 weeks, but if it's one I really feel strongly about or is a big deal, it's more than likely going to get 2 weeks. Now, next up, I always play with a paddle blind to not have any bias going in. And what I mean by that is, so let's say it's my first play session with a paddle. Usually I'll play with it, and then at the end of that play session, I try and spin test it so that the grit is still fresh. I'll clean it off with, a carbon eraser, make sure the grit is good. But I don't do my swing weight or the microscope usually before I go out and play with it. And the reason for this is because I want to have as little bias going into the paddle as possible. Now, of course, when you see a paddle and you pick it up or you've heard marketing about it, you're naturally going to have some kind of bias. If it's a thin paddle, you're probably going to assume it's a power paddle. But the reason I don't do all of those things right away is I want to go in and actually just figure it out because not every paddle is the same. Sometimes you have a thinner paddle that feels a little softer than you would expect, or a thicker paddle that hits way harder. The Legacy is certainly a great example of that. It's 16 millimeter, but hits like a truck. So I just want to go in and figure it out. Like I want to play with it and just see how I feel when I actually hit it. I don't want to see the spin numbers right away and then go, oh yeah, okay, it's like 1700. It's obviously great spin. I want to go play with it and see how it feels with my rolls. And then once I have a good impression of it, I'll go get those stats. And then that can confirm or deny how I feel about something. Maybe when I'm playing with something, I feel like it doesn't get great spin, but then the results show something different. Or maybe I feel like it gets great spin and the result's a little lower. Things like that. It's, I think, important to just kind of go in a little bit blind on it. I think it helps alleviate a little bit of bias. Again, there's always going to be some, but yeah, that's part of how I do that as well. And then even if I don't like a paddle, I try and give it extended amounts of time because, you know, you never know when something's going to change. I think the biggest example I can give of that was the Gearbox CX11. Absolutely hated reviewing that paddle. There was no point where I thought, wow, this is just a fun review. I could not wait to put those paddles down. And I hope it came across in the review, but I don't think they're objectively bad paddles. But for me, they're just not good. I hated it, but I pushed through it because I just, again, since it's a negative review, I really want to be 100% sure with how I feel about a paddle if I'm going to say negative things about it. You just, yeah, but man, that review really sucked to do. I'm not going to lie, guys. I would go out and all my friends were just like, holy cow, Chris does not like this paddle at all. So that was kind of funny. But anyways, after a few days of hitting a paddle, I've usually got a good sense of it. To be honest, I could probably review most paddles within about 3 or 4 sessions. The rest of the time is just spent on minute things. How does the sweet spot feel when I miss a ball like this? How is it on this type of reset or a dink? But usually it's like, I would say 80 to 90% of my opinion is good within those first few days. And then that extra 10% just comes with, you know, another week of playing just to be positive. And then after that, after a few days, I start benchmarking it against other paddles. So it's like, okay, what is this similar to? So with the Volair, people were like, well, you should probably compare it to a rhombus. And I was like, okay. So I pulled it out and I started hitting them and I was like, whoa, it's like, these are really similar. And the video was originally just going to be a Volair review, but the more I hit them, I was like, these are the same paddle. And then I start tearing them apart. And I'm like, okay, these are definitely the same paddle, at least from what I can see when taking it apart. The swing weights line up, the weights line up. When you took off the grip, they were built the same way. They're the same shape. It's just like, okay, that's pretty hard to deny that these are probably the same paddle. So you start comparing paddles so that I can give you guys a better idea of what it's similar to, so that if you've hit that paddle, or maybe you haven't, but you've heard other people talk about it, you kind of have a reference point of what to expect. Is it more of a power paddle? Is it more of a control paddle? If I say it's kind of like a black ace, you know it's probably really stiff and hits really hard. So that's when I usually bring those out, and I'll probably have 3 or 4 paddles that I'm benchmarking it against, just from what I recall from memory. And it's like, okay, it's pretty close to this one. It's not so close to this one. I'll take this paddle out. We don't need that one anymore. And then you kind of narrow it down to figure out what it's most closely related to. And to be honest, at a certain point, there are a lot of paddles on the market that are essentially the same thing. There might be really small differences between them in the manufacturing, but at the end of the day, guys, a lot of these paddles are made in the same factories in China, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You just need to know that means there's a lot of paddles on the market that aren't unique. And that's why you don't see a lot of reviews on certain paddles on my channel, is because I just know, okay, why would I spend my time on just telling you guys, oh yeah, it's the same thing as this? Now I will do that if there is a big value discrepancy, right? So the rhombus versus the Volair, I felt like the $45 difference in price was very notable. So if you were considering the Volair, you should probably go buy the rhombus if price is the biggest factor to you. If you just want to support Julian, go buy the Volair. It's a fine paddle. It's just, why would you spend $45 more? Same thing with the X-Spec. I think at this point, it's pretty well established that it's just a carbon one, but it's much cheaper. So if you want the best deal, you're going to go buy the X-Spec. And there are so many of these out there. And even if the paddles aren't the exact same, there's so many that overlap in so many ways that it's just not worth covering. I think at this point, the market is just absolutely flooded with raw carbon fiber paddles. And the biggest thing I would say to you guys is be cautiously skeptical when a raw carbon fiber paddle gets announced. It doesn't mean that every paddle's a clone, because I did wrongly assume at the time of release that the Legacy was just a carbon clone. I assumed that the 6.0 was just a Yola clone. I thought Vatic was just another raw carbon fiber paddle. So I didn't look into them. And then, we can clearly see I was wrong about that one. So they aren't all the same, but there's just a ton of them out there, guys. People are realizing how easy it is to launch a paddle company. You don't need that much capital. It's very easy to get off the ground. You find a manufacturer in China. They have a catalog you can choose from, or you can do a custom mold if you do want to stand out. But there are a lot of newer companies that don't do that. So yeah, just be aware that there are a lot of paddles on the market that are extremely similar. And when you guys hear me talk about a paddle, sometimes it might come across that I'm talking about it more negatively than positively. I would actually say most paddles on the market these days are good. So then at that point, if all the paddles are good, well, you have to differentiate them by, or one of the biggest ways you can differentiate them is by price. And it goes back to the same thing with X-Backs, or the X-Back Carbon 1 and Robinson Valère. Why spend $80 or $40 more when one's cheaper? There's just going to be a ton of those on the market. And, I just want people to be aware that you don't want to buy too much into the marketing. I think the marketing in pickleball is very good at convincing people that their paddle is something when it probably isn't. So after how many paddles I've hit, guys, I've got 200 in my office. I have hit probably the vast majority of those paddles. I just have such a big sense on the market as a whole that it's very easy for me to go, yeah, this paddle's kind of similar to that. It's not that special. And some people will call me out in the comments and say, dude, why are you so harsh on this paddle? And it's like, I'm not trying to be mean to the paddle. It's just, I don't know. It's just not special. When you've hit 30 different raw carbon fiber paddles, you're kind of just like, show me something new, please. So anyways, that's a bit about how I approach some of my paddles. There's probably more information that I'm forgetting. And, maybe I'll do another video in the future where I kind of vlog some of my paddle testing. But if you guys have questions about, how I do any of my paddle reviews, or one thing I'd actually love to know is, what is the most valuable thing in my reviews, or anybody's review, to be honest? Like, what is the piece of information that is the most helpful for you? I'd love to know so that I can incorporate it more. I feel like I've got a pretty good system down. But if there's something you guys consistently think I'm missing or not touching on, I'd love to know so that I can make the reviews better. But moving on, the last thing that I want to talk about is just how I approach sponsors. There's not really been a lot of sponsors on the channel. Full disclosure, the main way that I make money these days is through YouTube AdSense, as well as affiliate sales when you guys use my code to buy paddles. That's where the bulk of my income comes from. We have had, I think, really only one official sponsor, and that was American Eagle. They sponsored the podcast, and then we did a little bit of video work for them. But other than that, I don't think we've had any, or myself, if we just want to talk about the Pickleball Studio. And the main reason for that, guys, is it's tricky, right? The main companies that probably would want to sponsor me are paddle companies. And I won't say I'll never take a paddle sponsor, but very, very, very likely, like 99% sure, as long as I'm reviewing paddles, I'm not going to take one. Because even while I believe I could do that without bias, I don't think most people who stumble upon my channel would believe that. If you hear that I'm sponsored by X company and I review their paddle well, then you're going to go, oh, well, yeah, he's sponsored by them. Of course it's reviewed well. And then if I review another one, a different paddle, negatively, well, of course he's going to review it negatively. He's sponsored by this one. So that's very important to me. Probably never going to take a paddle sponsor unless I'm just trying to play pro, but it's probably not going to happen either. And then outside of that, it's just a little bit harder to find non-paddle sponsors when that's my niche, right? I'm starting to get reached out to more and more. And then after that, the biggest thing is that I'm just extremely picky, guys. I believe very much in being honest with people. I think you guys have seen that in my reviews. My goal is always to be honest, even if it means I'm being pretty brutal. I just want to make my point and get it across clearly. Same thing with sponsors. If I don't use the product or believe in it, then I just can't take a sponsorship from it. I've been offered a number of sponsorships and I've just not been all about the product. I can't imagine promoting it and then not really using it. And I know there's a lot of people out there on YouTube, athletes, other things, they can do that. And to be honest, I don't really know how. To me, it feels, I guess, just morally wrong. And I don't know, it's tricky because I don't think there's necessarily something bad about it per se. I think it's nice if the person believes in what they're promoting, but I think even if you don't believe in it fully, I think there are other people out there who may want the discount code or may want to be aware of it. Like, just because I don't like it doesn't mean no one will like it. But for me to promote it, it sure helps if I use it because I can talk about it all day, right? Like, companies that I would amazingly take a paid sponsorship from would be Melon, the hats I use. I absolutely love those hats. I would take a sponsorship from them in a heartbeat. I tell people about their hats all the time. I own 7 of their hats. It's actually kind of ridiculous. I don't know who needs 7 hats, especially when these are such nice hats. You really don't need 7, but I'm obsessed with them. So I would take a sponsorship from them. I would take a sponsorship from Head with the Revolt 4.0s. They do currently send me the shoes for free, but I would absolutely take a paid sponsorship from them as well because I love the product. I fully believed in it because I had big plantar fasciitis pain, started using those shoes, and it all went away. So I'm a huge believer in those. And then there's a number of other things out there like Element, LMNT. It's an electrolyte I use. Absolutely love it. If any of those companies approached me and said, we will give you money to promote this, I would take it in a heartbeat because I genuinely believe in that product. I think they're good products, and I think a lot of people would like them. So if you're, just not a company I believe in, I can't get behind it. And, to some extent that means I make less money, which maybe from a business perspective isn't great, but I also don't want to just be a business that's trying to solely make money. Like, I want to make money. I'm making a living doing this. And I think to keep it sustainable and bring on more people, I will have to find more ways to make money. But I personally don't ever see myself getting rid of, I guess, just my honesty for money is probably just the simplest way to say that. To be honest, I'm kind of rambling about that, but I just wanted to make that point very clear. So yeah, I don't know. I've been approached by a few really large brands and ones that probably would have offered me some very solid money, but the way that I would have needed to promote it, I didn't believe in it that way. So we turned those down. But other than that, I will say we are looking for sponsors on the podcast. We would like to have a title sponsor and, probably a couple others throughout the year. So if you guys do have a product of some sort that is not a paddle and you want to work with us, just email me at thepickleballstudio@gmail.com. Can't promise that we will accept, but I would love to hear about your product. And, if we love it, maybe you can be a sponsor of the podcast. It would be great. So yeah, other than that, guys, I don't have too much to say. I will say it is very weird doing this podcast on my own, talking for however long straight I have been talking. My voice is, I can tell, fading. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys thought of this. I'm always, eager to hear the feedback you guys have. I see the feedback you guys leave in the comments. I see pretty much every single comment that you guys leave on the channel. For the most part, occasionally one or two gets missed, but I do genuinely appreciate those who leave great feedback. I hear it all the time and I work hard to implement it. Sometimes it takes longer than others. One that many of you point out to me is that I say the word like a lot. And when I hear myself say it, it makes me cringe. Trust me, guys, I'm working on it. It's just a really hard speech pattern to break. So if you guys have any thoughts on this solo podcast, let me know. If it was terrible, I would genuinely like to know. If you thought it was good, that's also nice to know. If Will is ever busy or we're in a pinch and I need to record something, if you guys don't hate it, maybe I'll do more of those in the future. But yeah, thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. I will catch you in the next one.